Hi, I'm Clarissa Moll, producer and moderator of the Bulletin. Here's a short clip from one of our segments in this week's episode. To hear the whole conversation, visit the link in our show notes or search for The Bulletin on your favorite podcast platform.
A long, long time ago, I can still remember how that music used to make me smile. And now I knew if I might change.
On Tuesday night, the South Korean president shocked his country and the world by pronouncing martial law in response to what he said was an increasing threat to his presidency and democracy in the Asian country. President Yoon came to power in 2022, and he's faced a lot of resistance since then. But he's also done a lot of conciliatory work both in Asia and with the United States. Yes, that was him at the top of this segment singing American Pie to President Joe Biden at a state dinner earlier this year. Yoon's announcement set off protests and an emergency convening of the South Korean parliament, which quickly ruled to remove the measure. Yet even though we're seeing many in Yoon's cabinet now resigning, much of the West is left wondering what this means for South Korea's partnership in the East and its relationship with allies on this side of the globe. Russell, I woke up to this news and I need to start almost by just saying, stop the bus. What's happening here? I thought South Korea was a peaceful place, that it stood in sharp contrast to its counterpart in the north, to its neighbors in the east. What prompted this pronouncement of martial law, and what do you think was the sort of resident fear that President Yoon had as he made this pronouncement?
Well, I think this was an authoritarian move that didn't work. He drove the Chevy to the levee, and the levee was dry, I guess you could say. And I think what was terrifying about it is that you have the one island of stability on the Korean peninsula moving in an authoritarian direction at the same time that you have a general authoritarian pull in almost every region of the world right now. That was terrifying. But what was inspiring is the fact that you have it failed, and it failed very quickly, and it failed very quickly for a couple of reasons. One, because you had the South Korean people who clearly were not going to tolerate this, and you had elected members of parliament who were not going to allow this either, and not just those who were the opponents, political opponents, but also those who were in the same political tribe. So we're not going to allow these institutional guardrails to be torn down. And the other thing that was inspiring to me was watching in the United States Korean American pastors who were immediately involved in calling people to pray specifically for what was happening. Many of them who also knew pastors on the ground in South Korea who were helping people to think through and to process this and to stand. So in that sense, I think this was something that ought to really give a ballast of courage to people around the world when they face a similar power grab.
Yeah, the timeline of this was really fascinating to me. A late night TV announcement comes at 11 p.m. and literally within 2 hours, the National Assembly has convened. It's voted to overturn the martial law by 5 p.m. or 5 a.m. the next morning. It's all over. The cabinet has lifted the measure. And so in just a span of a few hours, we blink and we're standing in the aftermath. And Mike, why do you think the response of the general public was so fast and furious? Is this the power of social media to respond to this kind of thing? Or is there a deeper cultural history that we have to understand when it comes to martial law in Korea? Like this was a trigger for something deep within people to respond as swiftly as they did.
Yeah, I think there's some truth to all of that. I think for sure, technology enabled the word to get out very quickly, what was happening and how it was happening. People reacted badly to it for a lot of those cultural reasons. But also people who have grown accustomed to democracy and come to love it and come to love their freedoms don't like it when someone takes it away from them. And so you get that virulent reaction from people who've come to love liberty and love freedom. And so I think that I think that is probably the most significant factor in all of this, is simply the fact that people, people reacted because they reject the notion that someone can simply sort of take away the power of their elected representatives and take away the rights and liberties that they've with no direct connection to their own security or anything like that. To me, what's the most interesting about this story, even though the attempt failed, the attempt happened, and it struck me as an example, in the midst of some of the other things that we're seeing in the world right now, and in particular in the midst of, in the aftermath of things we've seen in the United States, like January 6th. It's one more example of, it made me think of the scene in the first Jurassic Park, where the warden at the park is talking about how for the first couple of weeks that the velociraptors were in their cages, they tested defenses, looking for weaknesses. It feels like leaders with authoritarian impulses around the world have been testing the fences for the last few years, and this is another example. The fence held. That's great. But it's not great that someone felt the liberty to test the fence in the first place. That's a bad sign for a trajectory for where we are.
I think there's something unique about South Korean history that puts two facets together that are necessary here. One of them is a democratic country with a commitment to democratic ideals. But secondly, an understanding of how fragile those democratic institutions are. And you have to have both of them, because if you have a country that just presumes, a little martial law happens and then things kind of snap back to normal, which is not the way that it works, you're going to end up with a normalization of this. The South Koreans had seen this kind of abuse of power before. They certainly can just look right over the border and see a totalitarian, authoritarian, bloodthirsty regime. They understand what it looks like not to have this, and they have a civic understanding of democratic governance and rule of law. And I think both of those things are necessary. So you look at this, for instance, in terms of you can see the same dynamic working in church situations. I mean, we've seen time after time after time after time of abuse of power and authoritarian leadership in congregations. If you have a congregation that can't even imagine that could happen, they usually are the people who think, well, I mean, everything must be on the up and up until it's too late. If you have a congregation that doesn't expect to have actual ethics and governance, then you're going to have it also. You have to have both a commitment to the right way of doing things and an understanding that has to be guarded, and it could be collapsed at any time. And I think in South Korea we saw both of those things.
Yeah, there had been some talk about this 24 hours as destabilizing the East. But I thought about Taiwan. We've talked about Taiwan on the show before, a country that's working very hard to maintain autonomy, to maintain a semblance of democratic rule. Do you think this, to your church comment, Russell, do you think that this emboldens a country like Taiwan to say, hey, we're going to stand our ground, or do you think that there is a destabilizing effect from this kind of thing where some of these smaller nations might be like, yeah, I'm not going to touch this now. We need to be very careful and sort of build up the walls even more carefully here to preserve what we have.
Well, I mean, one of the things that is most empowering right now of authoritarianism in all of its forms is a kind of fatalism that says, what can you do? And so anytime that there is an example of a people who are saying we actually can do something about this, I think that does call forward courage and imagination in other people. It doesn't always, but without it, you can't have that.
Listen to the full episode wherever podcasts are found.